Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm making a video on what exactly George Lucas's vision for Star Wars is, what he's accomplished, his background, all kind of summarized. Then I'll dive into it more because this is a video I've been wanting to make to kind of do a shallow explanation of George's vision to people who, not really shallow, but shallow to new people. That way people can see and understand George's vision when I'm constantly referring to it in like every video. But yeah, so this is an excerpt from The Making of Star Wars Revenge of the Sith by J.W. Rinsler in 2005. We are looking at the epilogue section called The Compassion of the Jedi, and I'm just going to read through the whole thing for you guys, and then we'll dive deeper into it once we're done. So without further ado, let's get started. George W. Lucas was born on May 14th, 1944, in Modesto, California. After graduating the University of Southern California, he directed THX 1138, American Graffiti, and 4 Star Wars films. He has executive produced Francis Ford Coppola's Tucker, The Man in His Dream, Jim Henson's Labyrinth, Ron Howard's Willow, Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat, and Akira Kurosawa's Kagemusha. Walter Murch's Return to Oz, Paul Schrader's Mishima, Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones trilogy, and of course the other 2 Star Wars films. He has helped pioneer several visual effects breakthroughs, began what became Pixar Animation Studios, and spearheaded digital filmmaking. With 7 months of work left on Revenge of the Sith, though it's impossible to speak of it as complete, certain observations can be made. For 3 years, a nonstop barrage of art and ideas, created by an incredibly talented group of core collaborators, has gone through filter of Lucas's mind, inspiring certain conceits and mixing with his own. The ultimate design of the movie's scripts, sets, vehicles, characters, and shots is the expression of a writer-director whose vision is at once popular and abstract, the detached eye of the documentarian and the intensely, almost idiosyncratically emotional lens of the man. The 2 Star Wars trilogies share many characters, but have different structures. Instead of telling another heroic coming-of-age story, Lucas has crafted in the prequels a historical drama, at whose center is Anakin Skywalker. His story is tragic, that of the Republic turned Empire, uncomfortably familiar. Anakin begins as a 9-year-old boy who is physically enslaved. He ends in the prequel saga a spiritual and mental slave to the Emperor, who is metaphorical, if not biological, father. First seen in Episode 1 as a beast beset by a crippling bureaucracy, the Republic Senate is, by the end of Episode 3, a rubber stamp for the Empire. As the locale for the duel between the Emperor and Yoda, the Senate finally becomes what it has always been, the physical manifestation of the internal conflict between totalitarianism and democracy. But the end of Revenge of the Sith is not the end of Anakin, whose story really closes when it merges with those of his children, Luke and Leia, in Return of the Jedi. It really has to do with learning, Lucas says. Children teach you compassion. They teach you to love unconditionally. Anakin can't be redeemed for all the pain and suffering he's caused. He doesn't right the wrongs, but he stops the horror. The end of the saga is simply Anakin saying, I care about this person, regardless of what it means to me. I will throw away everything that I have, everything that I've grown to love, primarily the Emperor, and throw away my life to save this person. And I'm doing it because he has faith in me. He loves me despite all the horrible things I've done. I broke his mother's heart, but he still cares about me, and I can't let that die. Anakin is very different in the end. The thing of it is, the prophecy was right. Anakin was the chosen one, and he does bring balance to the Force. He takes the ounce of good still left in him and destroys the Emperor out of compassion for his son. End quote. Anakin Skywalker's final confrontation with the Emperor occurs during Luke's first confrontation with the Emperor. which complements his father's dealings with the same man many years earlier. Indeed, the life of the father and the life of the son are commentaries of each other. One of Lucas's tendencies, evident throughout his films, is to tell simultaneous stories, many of which are interconnected. Beginning of quote. I come out of editing, and that's probably part of it, Lucas says. I think I have a short attention span, and that's probably part of it too, laughs. It's just my nature. The Star Wars saga is like a symphony, which has recurring themes, he adds. You have one theme orchestrated in a particular way in place, which then comes back orchestrated as a minor theme somewhere else. There are these little threads running through everything that are constantly turning events on their head. You see two people confronting the same things with different ends. It's a rhythm. I like the idea of seeing something from different perspectives. An advantage I have in this particular situation is that I have literally 12 hours to tell a story. It has the epic quality of following one person from the time he's 9 years old to the time he dies. It's Anakin's story. But obviously, there are many other characters in that story. His children, his best friend, and their stories carry through. So this isn't just a tune, it's a symphony. When you do it as a symphony, I think it actually becomes beautiful. There you go. So that is a short summary of George's background, of the general story of the first 6 movies, how they're all interconnected, and how Star Wars should be done, which he describes it as a symphony. Which, if you know classical music pretty well, then I think you'll understand that reference. If you don't, then, I'm sure George kind of explained it to you, Star Wars should all intertwine and connect in, a way that kind of reverbs off each other, like you'd see this thing in 3 that reminds you of 6, and then you see this thing in 6 that reminds you of 1, and you see this one thing in 1, and it reminds you of A New Hope, and then Phantom Menace, and then Attack of the Clones. It just is constantly bouncing, the ideas of Star Wars are bounce around the films, and there are these recurring themes within the idea of Star Wars that bounce each around, in between the films. And those ideas are simple ideas, like the main character. You have Luke and you have Anakin, and how they're opposites of each other, but there's this level of similarity. And you see the contrast and the similarities between each of their paths. And it's like a ball constantly bouncing around, right? And that is something George was able to do in these movies that was groundbreaking and phenomenal. And how he's able to have the main character of this movie be Darth Vader. It's a 12-hour movie, he said. But there's all these side characters. And all these side characters then get their own stories and their own spin-offs. And that's what he's inferring. So, when that's done, it all has to regurgitate back to the original Star Wars. It's a symphony. It's all one piece, but there are different little highlights and stanzas and chords, and you have all these just different elements of the same piece. Look at Duel of the Fates. You have the opera. You have the strings. You have the horns. They all have their little moment, or their big moment, like the opera starts the song off. And then you have moments where they're all working together. And then you have moments where it's just the strings and the horns, or the strings and the choir, or the horns and the choir. You have, all these elements just bouncing off each other and helping connect the piece and make it more beautiful. That's exactly what Star Wars is. So when you make a new product of Star Wars, it has to be its own, but connect to the saga. And connecting to the saga is where, Disney they're not doing that well. It should make sense. It should regurgitate back to the saga in some way. You should see some things, themes, not visual things, not, oh, this character's in here. No, it should be the methodical themes throughout your project should relate to the main story of Star Wars in some way. How does this help make the story of Star Wars, the symphony of Star Wars, more beautiful? That's what every project should do. And, it has to make sense. It has to fit the piece. You can't have Duel of the Fates, and then have, like, a banjo just start, like, strumming in the middle of it. It's like, Korra, like, that doesn't work. Like, it has to make sense. So George describing it as a symphony, I think, is, like, the most perfect, I guess, adjective or word to use for that. Because at the end of the day, it's true. Like, all 6 movies, Clone Wars, they all have, even Ewok Adventure, they relate to they relate to each other, all of them. When I walk Ewok Adventure, they're on Endor, there's Ewoks, the story of Wicket, right? The origin of Wicket, I don't know, is it origin? Or it might be after. Wicket's story, makes us relate it back to Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi makes it relate back to Ewoks. Clone Wars, we have Anakin's story and how it parallels with his story in Revenge of the Sith at times, and how it parallels with his story in Phantom Menace at sometimes, with him being, a pilot, but then him being, angry, like in Revenge of the Sith, and how it bounces back and forth. That's what it should be. These little motifs and themes played throughout Star Wars that help connect back to the first 6 movies. And the beauty of that is, I think, what makes Star Wars stand out from other franchises. Is because, let's take Marvel, for example. I love Iron Man. The first Iron Man movie, one of my favorite movies ever. I love it. I love the first Avengers movie. I love Infinity War. I love, Winter Soldier. And I love, what's it called? Iron Man 3. Well, I already said all Iron Man movies. You get my point. They all, like, have these stylistically different tones. And there's not enough of that bouncing to help it really connect. Because Iron Man 1 and 2 feel very fluid, like it's the same story. Then you go to Iron Man 3, and it's like a totally different tone. Tony acts totally different, and you just get this weird gap. But we had Avengers in there. But Avengers didn't bounce back to Iron Man 1 enough, and it didn't bounce forward enough to Iron Man 3. It was just this very, like, you wouldn't have thought Tony would get PTSD from the Avengers, through the Avengers. He just seemed fine. He was like, oh, well, we need to get shawarma, and I love that movie and that scene, but it doesn't help, it doesn't show what's ahead at all, because they have different writers and different people, and they don't really have a plan. So then they go to Iron Man 3, and then it's like, what? And then you go to Age of Ultron, and that had at least the Iron Man 3 theme was in it a couple times, so that kind of helped connect it. But it's just the threads aren't connected enough in Marvel for it to feel like one, because it doesn't, it's all over the place stylistically. And while you could say that's a good thing, in my opinion, I think you need more connection and you need more threads. Not just little Easter eggs, but you need plot and theme connections and tonality connections to the rest of the saga to help it feel linear. In Star Wars, that's exactly the case. It is the most... It's like... each of these movies has its own identity and tone. Attack of the Clones has its own feel. Phantom Menace has its own feel. Revenge of the Sith has its own feel. A New Hope has its own feel. Empire, Return of the Jedi, etc. They have their own feel, but they don't feel like a separate story at all. They all feel under the exact same story. It's the story of Darth Vader. And again, it's because George did such a good job connecting all the movies together and tying all the strings and making like this beautiful art with no loose ends. And that's something you have to add to when you are making Star Wars. You have to, when you're undoing those strings, you have to tie them back right as they were before. You can't start leaving loose ends and then having new things come and tie onto those loose ends and make more loose ends and more gaps, and that's not how it works. Star Wars is this closely knit, piece of crochet. That's George's movies. And some of Disney's stuff, they go in there and they cut the, crochet into pieces off the crochet, and they try to rearrange them and make it something different. And then now there's all these loose ends that aren't tied up and neat. So when you come in for Star Wars, when you're, undoing some of that crochet, you better tie it right back up and help it connect back to the main movies and help it feel like, it's part of the same story in the same universe, near perfectly, or else you're going to have loose ends. Because it's really hard to cut a piece of crochet and, I guess, stitch it back together without seeing the bits of that loose end. It's hard, but it can be done. Look at Clone Wars, That was a beautiful addition to Star Wars, that it had the same tone, the same overall feel and pace and editing style, but it had its own identity. So it fit perfectly. That's Star Wars. But then you take, let's say, a project like The Acolyte, where it just goes in there and chop, 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 and it's like you make a 5-year-old go reconnect all those ends, of the crochet that are all split up and everywhere. That's not going to turn out well. And there's loose end here, connection here, but then a loose end up here. It's like a disaster. Because The Acolyte doesn't have the same tone. It doesn't connect to the first 6 movies. It deranges and it, destroys episode 1 and, takes significance away from episode 1 and from the main story of Star Wars, which is the story of Darth Vader, and turns it into a mess. So now they've made that end of Star Wars a mess, right? So that's the problem these days, is you can't take away from the first 6 movies. You can only add. And when you add, you can't change things that George set in stone. Like the Chosen One prophecy and the Vergences, the Vergence in the Force, which is only Anakin Skywalker and nobody else. And George has made that very clear. It's a very hard task, but I can do it. I've done it before, and I've done it actually multiple times. I've only turned one of them into a film, but I've written countless Star Wars stories of my own when I was younger, and I did it. It was fine. There were no loose ends. I had all the Force powers that made sense. I knew how the Force worked. I knew how the Jedi act. I knew how all the main characters acted. I knew what they would do in a tense situation or a peaceful situation or a dark situation or a very light situation. I know how they would all respond. And that's what's important, is knowing how this group would respond, how these characters would respond. and knowing, okay, well, I can't sit on this scene too long because that's not how Star Wars is. You're cutting, you know, and just knowing that that's a piece, and having just beautiful set pieces and big shots and knowing the right movements, which are they're very slight movements in most shots. Unless it's a moment of like intimacy, the shot is still because the actors are doing it all. But in action scenes, there's always movement to make you feel like you're in the moment. And I've talked about this before, but the camera work is so easy, and they can't even get that down. And I'm like, bro, that is the easiest stuff in the world. Like really, there's just a lot of push-ins. You don't get like fast zooms or crazy wipes or these super cinematic shots of like, you know, George once described it as shooting a documentary. You shouldn't have all this flashy color grading and, you know, flashy rack focuses and like all this crazy crap. That's not how Star Wars is, you know? And it might not look as artsy fartsy cinematographer as you want, but at the end of the day, that's Star Wars, and you can't go in and cut that crochet in half and try to change it by yourself, but you never will, because the original art will always be the most pure, the best connected, and the most neat. But once you start adding on to it, it starts getting messy and more messy and more messy, which is why you should do your best to keep it to its original form, you know? And the only one who's really allowed to add an entire new chunk to that art piece is George, and no one else. You know, George can say, oh, I'm going to add, let's say, I don't know, a crown to my little crochet guy. George can do that. But now that's a new piece that when people add to, they're going to have to, you know, knit it back together perfectly. And that's just another piece to the story that they're going to have to keep track of. But, you know, it's a tough task in terms of really connecting that knit together well, or keeping that symphony in sync and keeping that symphony beautiful. It's daunting, it's scary, but if you just do the homework like I have, I can give Lucasfilm the books to have their, you know, writers read. I know which ones to look at. I know which behind the scenes videos to watch. I know which elements of each movie to look at more accurately, and kind of dig at more. You know, I know how it's shot. I know the scale of Star Wars. It should be huge. Always should never be super condensed like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Should never be that condensed. You should be like, whoa, you know, like the Utapau. When you're watching Grievous land on Utapau, you don't just see his ship land in the hangar bay and him walk out. You follow his ship from space down, and your eyes are just feasting on this beautiful, I guess, planet, right? With all these sinkholes and all this moss and these rocks. You're like, why are they living underground? You get all these questions. Then you go down one of the sinkholes and you see all these different structures and ships and creatures and weird pterodactyl things. Then you go into one of the many landing bays in that sinkhole of the many sinkholes of the planet. So you're just engaging your viewers and diving them deeper and deeper into your world. And then he lands. And on the platform, we are introduced to our first group of people on that planet, which are the Separatists. You have the battle droids. You have Grievous. You have the Magna Guards. I think there are a couple, no, there weren't. So it's just the droids, you know. Then you go into the room, And you're like, what is this room? Oh, there's a hologram. Oh, it's Darth Sidious. Why is Grievous talking to Sidious? All these questions from that simple of a transition to where if we cut straight into the hangar, we would have lost half that experience, but you saw the just beautiful flat of the planet, and you got all these questions from the planet itself, and then you get all these questions when he flies into the sinkhole, and then you get more questions when he lands and when he goes up the elevator to Sidious, and that's the magic of Star Wars. It's simple writing and simple shooting. Not simple writing, that's not. My point being is for those little events, it's literally as simple as writing, follow Starship into Utapau's atmosphere. Show Starship break through clouds. We see, the planet's surface with many sinkholes, and then you write about the flora and fauna. Then we say, we follow the ship into one of the sinkholes. We see blah, 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 blah. We follow the ship onto the platform. You're done. It's easy. You just say what's in your head on the page, and you don't even need to say that. You could say, ship flies into atmosphere, flies through clouds, you see surface, flies into sinkhole, lands, Grievous walks out. Done. And from there, you have made Star Wars. It's these simple things that make it feel like Star Wars the most. The beautiful writing of George Lucas, that's pretty much impossible to recreate. You can do a really good job at it, but to really recreate it, that's not, easy, because George is an absolute legend. So when I meant simple writing, I meant more like the, transitions and planet stuff and, the atmosphere and the effects. Pretty easy to write. And just simple camera movements. You follow with ships always. That's something you may know. Notice now that I say it is, you're always following ships. Always. That's just how Star Wars is done. Or the only time it's still, the ship zips past and you cut. That's just how it goes. So there's that. And then with Star Wars, you're never supposed to just do something that George already did again. You're supposed to add. But at the same time, when you're adding, you're just stitching a new color into the crochet figure. You're not adding a different piece to it. That only George can do that, as I said before. But you can stitch your own little shade of color in there that makes George's story even cooler. That's what you should be doing. Mando did a decent job at that, the first 2 seasons. There were some bulges, but not that many. There are some little pieces, it was okay. Then you have The Last Jedi, and that's they're oh, we're gonna add another foot onto his knee. We're gonna add and then you have Acolyte that's oh, let's make it have 2 heads. Right? You can't do that. Only George can. And now that thing, the little crochet figure, which was George's 6 movies, is now a demon. I don't know what the heck happened to it, but the George's crochet figure is just now this little interior piece, at the heart of the demon, and that's just unfortunate, but it's still there. And what I've learned to do is I just carve out George's piece and I take it out and I'm this is Star Wars, and I seal up the beast and I'm the beast demon thing, that's not Star Wars, that's something else. But the little crochet guy, that's 1 through 6 Clone Wars, that is the real Star Wars. And until someone can stitch into that right, it will not be added on to by anybody successfully. So I hope that helped things make a little more sense on how just things should stay connected. They should stay, similar, but to add their own little flavor to it. That's what it really should be. But at the end of the day, it's George's story, and you can't just make it your own like Leslie Headland. That doesn't work. You have to do it under George's framework, but you can add your own touch, because that's what all the Star Wars movies are. They're all different from each other, but they're all the same. You know, it's like, you know the Holy Trinity, my fellow Christian viewers. It's like that. Like the saga, they're all the same, but they're not. Like Phantom Menace is not Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones is not Phantom Menace, but it is Star Wars. It's the same kind of idea. And you should create that connection and add your own box. It's not a trinity anymore at that point, because there's already 6. But you get the point. When you're adding your own box, it should fit and make sense to the idea of Star Wars, which that's another video I could do. Because this is George's vision for Star Wars and how it should play out. Simplified, by the way. This is simplified. I could go into every detail. But yeah, so I hope that made sense. And I hope, comparing it to a symphony, I think that's a pretty good explanation from George of how it all works. And you might need to go through this video multiple times. You might need to really think about that statement. That's what I love about the way George explains things, is you have to really think about it for a while for it to click. And then once it clicks, you're like, oh my gosh, that is the most wise thing I have ever heard from a movie guy. Like that is like, yeah, for me it clicked instantly, because I know Star Wars. I kind of at this point know how I don't know George as personally, but like I know George kind of distantly, but not really. You know what I mean? Like I know how he talks, and yeah, so it's just easy for me to decipher now. But I hope that helped you out a lot. If you're confused, more videos are incoming kind of relating to this topic, which my next one, my next Star Wars video will probably be the idea of Star Wars, the ideas of Star Wars, which will be what exactly makes something Star Wars, makes something not Star Wars. Like what's like the tone, and what's the I guess character structure, and all of that. That'll come in another video. This is just like a George's vision for connecting new Star Wars to his original vision kind of video. It's like a brief explanation of the next video. It's complicated. This stuff takes a long time to understand, but I get it, and it clicks. And it's sometimes hard to put in words. But yeah, so just go back in the video, and I just recommend really thinking about it, going back and, I guess, re-listening to that George section, because he explained it better than me. And, yeah, so thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. And until the next time, your focus determines your reality, and may the Force be with you always. Goodbye.